Hello and welcome to episode 60 of PhotoKitchen. I'm your humble host, MD Welch. And on today's all-digital PhotoKitchen edition, we're going to talk about retouching inside of Adobe Lightroom Classic. Now, every now and then I have to take a moment to pause and walk away from my traditional workflow of doing things inside of Adobe Photoshop to see if Adobe Lightroom Classic has finally caught up with the editing tools that I use every day to edit my landscapes and portraits. Now, I'm going to say at the very beginning of this video, I'm still going to use Photoshop at the end of this, but if you find Photoshop to be complicated, you don't want to dive into that massively huge program to do something simple as removing blemishes or flyaway hairs, I'm here to tell you that Adobe Lightroom Classic finally has tools that you could really dive into and do some professional quality Photoshop level retouching. That's a very big mouthful. So I'm going to demonstrate this on two images. I'll do it with a portrait, and then I'm also going to work on a landscape image. Now let's go ahead and start with the landscape since that's what we have selected here. I want to point out that both of the images have already had some significant global retouching done. So contrast, brightness. So in the case of this image, this is the before, this is the after. Now, in the case of this image, this is something we're facing every day as photographers, and it's great. More and more people are going outside. Who can complain about that? But they're also in your frame. So how easy can you remove people from your image inside of this program? And the answer is, it's really easy. We're going to come over to the Remove tool and click it once. Now, the Remove tool inside of Adobe Lightroom Classic, if you've never used it before, is actually three different tools. You have something called the Remove tool, then the healing brush, and the clone stamp. Now, all of these tools exist inside of Adobe Photoshop, but here's the problem. If you want to do a non-destructive workflow or be able to easily undo these things later on, you have to know a certain series of steps and options to turn on inside of Adobe Photoshop. Create a new layer, make sure that you're doing everything to the new layer. That's going to make a non-destructive thing. The benefit of Adobe Lightroom Classic is you don't have to know any of that. You just have to use the tool. All of these edits that we're about to do, both on this image and the portrait image, are non-destructive. You don't have to have this big, massive library of information, which is sad because I have that hanging around in my noggin, but it's not sad for you because you don't have to store that information or learn it. The Remove tool uses something called generative AI. And if there's a problem with the Remove tool, it's this. One, generative AI requires an internet connection. So if you're on a plane going across the ocean and you don't have Wi-Fi and you're trying to retouch images, this is not going to work. There's nothing saying that you can't uncheck this box and see how well the Remove tool works without generative AI, but in most cases, it's always going to be a little bit better, if not significantly better. The other problem with generative AI or the Remove tool as a whole is it is processor intensive. So this will take a computer with a little bit of age on it and make it feel like a very old computer. I'm using a relatively new Mac here, and you will see that it will slow things down and we'll have to speed them up. Now, as far as the options for the Remove tool, there's one. It's the size brush. So we're going to come into here and we'll increase the size just a little bit, not too much, because one thing I will say about using any retouching tool in any program, the size of your retouching or the size of your brush has a direct impact on how accurate the retouching is. So don't grab a big old brush and just start painting everything away and then be shocked with the results not looking that good. So we're going to come in first. Let's remove this little architectural or overhang element here. We'll get rid of some of the fencing. Now, the minute you use the Remove tool for the first time, it will overlay with a color. Now, in this case, with Lightroom Classic, the default color is red. And this is technically what you call a mask. And you've created a mask here and you're designating that area to be retouched. The tool itself will change. You will get a selected box here, which will allow you to add or subtract and also allow you to change the brush size inside of this window. I will say that sometimes people will find better results by removing one item at a time, but we're actually going to remove them all at once. So I'm going to have add selected. It's usually selected by default, but it doesn't hurt to click on it. And I'm going to select the remaining individuals on the beach. Now, hopefully through the power of editing, I sped that up because that was really boring to watch. One thing to point out, you will see that I have gone a little bit over the areas that I'm trying to remove. So if you've done that, use the subtract brush and remove some of that information. You're just going to give yourself a better starting point with these tools. And that's in any program, by the way. That's not just an Adobe Lightroom Classic thing. Now that I have everything selected, we're going to go ahead and click the Remove button. Now, I will speed this up in Edit because when I hit this Remove button, you're going to get this dialog window. And what's happening is the image is being analyzed, AI is being used, it's communicating back to the mothership at Adobe, whatever is going on there, that is happening, and it's going to remove all of the information, which we'll see in a matter of seconds, but actually minutes in real time. And after a few seconds/minutes, all of our information is removed and the results are pretty good looking. Now, I'm not going to zoom in because of time of this video, but I would zoom in and make sure that everything looks good. If you bring your cursor in, you can mouse over and see the areas that you impacted. And if you wanted to start over again or remove them, you could click on them, hit backspace or delete, start fresh, or do some further modification. And you could do that in the selected box here. Every time that you use generative AI, whether it's Lightroom Classic or Photoshop, you're always going to get 3 variations of what AI thinks are good results. You could click through these arrows here and select different variations for your areas to see whether or not they are good or bad. And you can select them individually, so you don't have to do all of them at once. So if you felt this result wasn't that good, you could click on it, have it selected, and then come down and do a different variation. And you will see the shoreline here change. And every now and then when I do this, when I'm practicing, especially on this image, one time I got a castle that appeared here for no reason. So it can be a little bit odd, but it will work. And if you do get 3 variations you don't like, hit the generate button again. But you can click on these areas individually. And if you can't see them, as you can't see here, come down to Tool Overlay, go from Auto to Always. And now you will see every little icon, which is a little black little square here. And then you can mouse over them and make additional changes if you want to. There's also opacity control, which doesn't really apply here, but if you wanted to subtly blend something in or maybe have it poke through a little bit, you could reduce the opacity of the area that you have selected. One thing to point out, and this is very common when using any sort of retouching tool, is you may see red dots under any adjustment that you've made. We have one underneath the mask icon and one underneath the edit icon. We'll click on the mask icon first. And what this is basically saying is that there's something that's been done that the program needs to reevaluate the image. This is usually done by clicking on the mask. We had selected the sky to knock down the brightness and increase the contrast and saturation. And by clicking on this mask, in this case, mask 1, you'll see that you get an update here. So you'll click the update and we'll go ahead and run the update. And nothing really changes, but for whatever reason, Lightroom Classic wants that to be done. We'll come back to the edit icon here. Because adaptive color was used as the profile, which is a completely different video, but a very powerful tool, we'll hit update here and it will update that, and notice the red dots have gone away. It's not the end of the world if you have red dots, but it's always good to address those, especially before you export them out, especially if you're doing any level of printing, because you want to make sure that everything is in its best quality and condition before you send it out to print. Digital, I would still do it, but it might not be the end of the world. Now let's move on to portrait retouching, which is, to me, where Lightroom Classic has made significant improvements. Yes, the remove tool is fantastic. It's great. Generative AI is fine. But the ability to select certain body parts inside of Adobe Lightroom Classic and just work on those body parts can really elevate your retouching. You might even choose to do this even if you are going into Adobe Photoshop. So what do I mean by this? Well, let's click on the mask icon. And we're going to start first by selecting parts of the individual. So rather than selecting anything here at the top of the mask, you're going to come down to where it says people. And Adobe Lightroom Classic does a great job of recognizing people. In this case, we have one person in this frame. We'll click on the person icon, and then it will load what I call the body masks. It'll show you all the different features. And if you roll over or scroll over or mouse over the areas, you will see this red overlay showing you what it thinks is facial skin and body skin. So in this case, we're actually going to make an adjustment just of the skin. It's going to not include the lips. It's not going to include the eyes, and we could see that here. So with these areas selected, I'll go ahead and click Create Mask. Do take note that you could create 2 separate masks here. If you're doing the same adjustment, it's highly recommended that you just create one mask of these 2 separate body areas. So we'll click Create Mask here. It'll make Mask 1. It's a good idea to rename the mask. We'll call this Skin. And also important to point out that with this mask selected, you will see what I call sub masks or subcomponents. This is what's making this mask happen. Now, each mask has their own individual controls, which are found now underneath the mask icon above the basics panel. And many of the panels that you're working with inside the basics panel or inside the development module, are repeated here. Not all of them. There's no color mixer. Hey, Adobe, what's going on? But there's a few things that are missing, but there's a lot of other things that are here. In this case, we're going to come to effects and we're going to play around with texture and clarity for the skin texture. I'm going to come over to where my left column was though before, and I'm going to zoom in to 100%. And I hide my column in my film strip when I'm using the development module, so I have more room to focus on the image. I'm going to come into the texture slider first, and I'm just going to slide it all the way negative. One thing that I always share with students and fellow photographers and retouchers is be excessive with your retouching. If you're doing this right and you have the correct workflow, you could always back that value off. But by being excessive with an adjustment, you could see what that adjustment is really going to do. You could always reduce it. In fact, a lot of times that's a way to avoid over retouching, is go way too far and then start to back off until it looks good. Now, in this case, we could see the texture smooths out the skin, but there's still some detail in the texture there. Let's do the same thing with clarity. Let's take clarity all the way negative. Now, clarity does something similar, but it also starts to make the skin look a little bit plastic. So texture might be a better place to modify or work with. So I'm going to do a significant amount of negative texture. That looks pretty good. And I'll also do a significant amount of clarity, but not as much. Maybe about half as much. So in the 70s for texture, in the 30s for clarity, but that's going to be different for every person. So there's no need to write that recipe down. So far, so good, but let's also come into tone and just brighten up the skin a little bit. And what's nice is you have some before and afters with local adjustments. If you come down to the bottom of the local adjustment area in the right-hand column, there's an eyeball here that will just give you a before and then an after. So click and hold down to get a before, release to get an after. Now it's important to point out, if you have multiple masks, this will give you before and after for all of the masks. Since we only have one mask here at the moment, this is just giving you essentially the same thing. The minute we have multiple masks, you'll have to do that individually, which can be done by coming up to the mask panel and you'll see an eyeball for skin here, and it's the exact same process. Now you might be looking at this and thinking, MD, this is way too far. And it is, but that's the beauty of local adjustments. All of them have an amount slider at the very top. So if you go too far and you felt the overall application, not the brightness, not the skin texture, just the overall look and feel was too much, you could just back off the amount slider. And you could do this at any time. So if you made a print of this and you're looking at it and going, oh, this looks way, way, way over retouched, no problem, just back off the amount slider. If you felt it was an attribute of the mask, then you have to come into that area, say exposure or the effects area in the case of the skin here. But it's nice that you can kind of reduce the overall thing. This is very hard to do in Photoshop without a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience. Let's continue with this. Let's do something to the lips. We're going to create another new mask here. We're going to come down to select people again. We're going to click on our person, and then we're going to select lips, and we'll create another mask. Now from here, we're just going to maybe sharpen the lips a little bit. Let's bring a little bit of clarity into the lips, kind of enhance that texture just a touch, sharpen them up a little bit. And then let's also play with the color. We'll come to the color panel. We can increase the saturation of the lipstick color. And I'm going to use hue here. Sometimes the color function, which I'll show you with the eyes in a second, it does a better job. It just kind of depends on what you're doing with the lipstick color. But I'm just going to drag it just a little bit more to the left. I'm going to take that kind of natural, more natural looking lip color a little bit more to a rose or a pink. There we go. And again, because I've done 3 adjustments, if it's too much, I have a slider up here, or I can modify them individually later on. I'm going to double click on mask 1 and just rename it while I'm here. Just like layers in Photoshop, always rename your masks. And of course now, because I have 2 masks, if I do the eyeball for the adjustments, I get a before and an after for both. I would have to go to the masks themselves and click on the eyeball for each one to do a before and after of just that mask. Now, in this case, the lips are pretty good, but if you needed to further adjust them, you could use the add or subtract function here and add or subtract and use the brush tool to maybe remove or add to that mask if necessary. But in this image's case, we've gotten great selections with the automatic masking, so we'll just leave them alone and we'll create one final mask here, and we're going to select people one more time, to person, iris and pupil, create mask. And in this case, we want to sharpen. And once again, you can approach this a couple of different ways. You could come into the effects panel, come into say like clarity and crank up the clarity. That would be a result you get with an increase in amount of clarity. It's excessive, but you could see it. Let's double click to reset that. Let's take texture all the way up and see that. A little bit more subtle, but you could still see it has a radical impact. And you could also try detail. You could also sharpen the eyes using sharpness here if you wanted to do that. I find for eyes, it's probably best to use effects. It's just an easier control to do. And we're going to take texture up about halfway. And then we're going to come to color. We're going to saturate those eyes a little bit more. And again, everything here is excessive because I could back it off later. And then I'll come into color and I'm going to click on this box and I'm actually going to overlay a color of blue and make sure the saturation's all the way up. And now that is way, way, way too much. We look like she's been on the planet Arrakis way too long. That's a good reference if you get it. Let's back off the amount significantly, come into mask 1, rename it to eyes, and then click on the before and after eyeball for that mask. Here's our before, here's our after. It's subtle now, right? And again, that's nice because of the actual slider. Now we're done with our masking for the moment, so we'll go ahead and hit close. And then we could click once on the image to zoom out, or we could use the navigator panel if you wanted to do that. And now we could hit the backslash key on the keyboard to do a before and do an after. And again, if you feel like it's too much and the skin does look a little too bright now, we could click on that mask icon, click on skin, and let's just back off the amount a little bit. And now we could see the skin before and we could see it after. Maybe the lips probably are a little too much. Let's back off that slider as well. There we go. And we'll hit close and we have a very nice result. Now, of course, you could go further from here if you wanted to darken down the background. Let's just do that really quick. It's so fast. We'll click the new mask button. We'll do a select subject. A lot of people will do select background, but in my experience, Adobe has a better time, or gives you a better mask at least, of subjects rather than backgrounds. I don't know why this is, but I'm just going to call this background because that's what I'm going to do with it. And then I am going to click the options for the mask. That's these 3 dots here. And I will invert background, right? So now everything that is the background is red. And I'm just going to come into here and I will just reduce the exposure. Again, way too much. And then I could either use the exposure slider or the amount slider. Because I've only done one, there's really no difference between the two of them, but I can definitely decrease the amount. Now, the beauty of the amount slider is not only can you back it off, but you could also increase it. So if you felt like it wasn't dark enough and it wasn't saturated enough, you can increase that slider and it will increase the amount of those 2 adjustments. So it does work also in a positive way as well as backing it off. So again, another nice thing about the amount slider, and that does not exist at all inside of Adobe Photoshop. So that's a really nice feature. We'll go ahead and click close here. Now, if you wanted to do any retouching, if there were blemishes or anything like that, you could come into the remove tool. You could use, say, the healing brush here, which I find works better for blemishes. Yes, the remove tool is powerful, but the healing brush just doesn't take that long. So you could come over and start to retouch some of these areas that you want to remove. I'm not going to waste your time by doing all of the retouching here. You get the idea. My brush is a little too large here. The only thing to be aware of with the healing brush is it will do some very weird sample areas sometime. So you have to maybe reposition those sample areas. And for whatever reason, it's also a little bit slower when I'm doing screen record here. So you'll see it kind of lag down a little bit. There we go. And now I could select. There we go. So healing brush works great. The only mark against Lightroom Classic at this moment is because each one of these little icons is its own option, meaning that you could come in, change the heal, change the opacity, change the feather, and also refresh this. The problem is it can take a little bit too long, especially if you have a lot of blemish work or retouching to do. But if it's a small amount, like I have here with my amazing subject, Zakota, she has great skin. There's just a few things that may be fixed, especially after we've softened that skin detail. I think that Adobe Lightroom Classic is just as fast as Photoshop. But if you have, say, a lot of blemishes, a lot of flyaway hair, these little individual things, that could be a reason to still use Photoshop. We'll go ahead and click close to accept. We'll zoom out, see our image. Take note that there is a red dot underneath the mask icon. This again will usually happen when you're doing any level of retouching. So we'll come in, we'll click on our masks, we'll just hit update, make sure everything's dialed in. And because the skin mask contains 2 sub-masks, you have to click on those individually, hit update. So to answer the question that we started with at the beginning of this video, is this a program that you could do a complete image retouching on? The answer is yes. Again, there's still things that I think are better inside of Adobe Photoshop, but it requires such a learning curve that the little things that Lightroom Classic doesn't do as well, I think those sacrifices might be worth it. I'm still going to use Adobe Photoshop, but this might be the thing that convinces you, you know what? I can maybe leave Adobe Photoshop to the side, do all of my work inside of Adobe Lightroom Classic. You got one image to manage, no PSD file or TIFF. You don't have to worry about creating layers. You don't have to worry about tool settings. Everything's non-destructive. You just work on the image, and at any time you want to start over again, you always have that reset button or the history panel. Adobe Lightroom Classic, what's not to love? Hey, speaking of love, maybe more like than love, I hope you've liked this video. If you have, please hit the like button. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. And if you have, thank you for your support. And if you know anybody who's doing retouching inside of Adobe Lightroom Classic, please share this video with them or the channel itself and other content that we have. And until next time, I'm MD Welch, wishing you all the best from this very digital version of PhotoKitchen.